to a question, well, honestly, a question I think we all kind of think about, right? Like,
Mm.
how do all the things we go through, all those experiences, actually end up shaping our political beliefs?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question,
It
really.
is. And you know what? It's you guys are amazing listeners who actually pushed us to really explore this.
Yeah.
We got so many requests to like dig into the forces behind how we see the political landscape. So that's
Hmm.
what we're doing today.
Yeah.
And we've gone deep, my friend. We found a ton of research.
We have. There's so much out there. We're looking at everything from serious academic studies, like the kind you find in political science journals, psychology, sociology, you name it,
Oh, yeah, the heavy hitters.
to those kind of more general essays that try to make sense of this connection, which, let's face it, it is a pretty complex connection.
It really is.
Yeah.
But that's exactly why we're here today. Our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to sort through all this material and pull out the really key insights, like those aha moments that help you understand how your own unique journey connects to where you stand politically. We're going to skip the jargon, keep it clear, and hopefully make it an engaging exploration.
That's the goal.
All right, so where do we even begin with this whole journey of figuring out our political beliefs?
Well, I think it often starts way back, right, in those earliest experiences, the ones we have within our families, the values we kind of soak up as kids. That stuff really becomes a foundation for our whole political orientation.
Makes sense. So, like, imagine a family. Maybe they constantly talk about personal responsibility, limited government, the type.
Yeah, I can see that.
Someone growing up surrounded by those ideas, they might end up leaning more libertarian.
Yeah, you could totally see that happening.
Right. And then, kind of the flip side, picture a family where dinner conversations are all about social inequalities and how important collective action is.
Right.
Well, those folks might end up more attracted to progressive ideas. Right.
Right.
And Source One, by the way, really highlights this idea of how our closest social circle shapes us early on. But it's not just about passively absorbing what people say, is it?
Nope, not at all. The same source actually points out that even being involved in political stuff early on can have an impact, like helping out with a local campaign or even going to a peaceful protest with your family. That kind of stuff can give you a firsthand look at how politics actually works.
Yeah. You're not just reading about it in a textbook.
Exactly. These early experiences, they make something that feels kind of abstract suddenly very real.
Right. And I bet that direct experience can be a really powerful teacher. So that's kind of the anecdotal stuff, but we also looked at some of the, more academic research, right?
We did, and there's this whole field called political socialization, and they've been looking at how we develop our political beliefs for a long time. A lot of the early research focused on how those beliefs get passed down from parents to their kids. Source 2 talks about this.
The classic you vote like your parents idea.
Exactly. But of course, it's a lot more nuanced than just inheriting your parents' politics, you know?
For sure.
The research acknowledges it's tough to separate cause and effect here. Like, we see that parents and their kids often have similar political views, but is that one causing the other? Or are they just exposed to similar environments? Could there be some genetic factors at play that we haven't fully figured out yet? It gets complicated.
It's like nature versus nurture,
Yeah.
but in politics.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting to study. We found some really specific ways those early life experiences can steer us towards certain political viewpoints.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that. This was cool.
Well, Source 16 talks about how the way our parents raised us has an impact. Like, there's research suggesting that kids who grow up in homes where obedience and rules are really emphasized, well, they tend to have more conservative political beliefs later on. It's like that early emphasis on authority and social order sticks with them.
Interesting. It's almost like it lays the groundwork.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay, and then there was this other finding. This is in Source 2. It said that young men who grow up with sisters are more likely to be conservative on gender roles and even more likely to identify as Republican. I mean, that wasn't what I expected.
Right. It's a fascinating little detail. And researchers are still trying to figure out exactly why it happens. But one theory is that in families with more daughters, traditional gender roles get emphasized more, even in subtle ways. It really shows how even those kind of small family dynamics can have an effect on our political attitudes, sometimes in surprising ways.
Okay, so that's early childhood. What happens as we get a little older, move out of the house, and start experiencing those broader educational settings, like going to college?
Ah, college. That can be a big one. Especially those college years, they're often seen as a key time for intellectual growth. Source 1 points out that when you're exposed to all these new ideas and diverse perspectives, it can really broaden your political horizons. You start to question what you thought you knew and develop those critical thinking skills you need to analyze complicated political issues.
Yeah, that's when you're really challenged for the first time, maybe.
Often, yeah.
We always hear about how college supposedly makes people more liberal. Is there actually research to back that up?
Well, yeah, there's some evidence for that. Source 25 talks about a connection between higher levels of education and having more liberal views. They also tend to put more emphasis on individualistic values.
That's interesting.
Right. And it makes sense when you think about it. The whole academic environment encourages you to question everything, to engage with different ideologies. So for some people, that can definitely lead to a change in how they think about politics.
But is it a direct cause and effect thing? Like, does going to college automatically flip a switch and make you more liberal?
Well, that's the debate, right? Source 25 acknowledges that the causal link isn't completely clear-cut. It could be that people who are already leaning liberal are simply more likely to go to college in the first place.
That makes sense.
So it's tough to tell for sure whether it's the education itself that's the driving force or if it's more about the type of person who seeks out that kind of experience.
Okay, so maybe it's a bit of both. So we've talked about family and education, but what about our careers? How does the work we do affect our political views?
Well, our jobs can definitely have an impact, especially if our profession is directly connected to areas where policy is involved, like healthcare or environmental conservation. Source 1 uses those as examples. When you're dealing with those issues day in and day out, you get this really unique perspective.
Right, like you see the real world effects.
Exactly. And that practical understanding can definitely shape your political opinions, even lead you to become an advocate for certain policies.
So like a doctor who works within a certain healthcare system, they might develop strong opinions about healthcare reform based on their experiences with patients and seeing the limits of that system.
Exactly. Or a scientist studying climate change, they might become a vocal advocate for certain environmental policies because they're seeing the data firsthand.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
So our jobs can shape our views, but what about taking a more active role in politics? Like going beyond just voting, does that influence our beliefs too?
It definitely can. Source 1 highlights how getting involved in political activism, whether that's volunteering on a campaign, joining a political party, or even joining advocacy groups, all of that can have a huge impact on how our beliefs evolve.
Because you're not just observing anymore, you're in the game.
Yeah, you're getting your hands dirty,
Yeah.
And when you're actively working on issues you care about, you really start to understand how complex they are. And that often strengthens your beliefs even more.
You're seeing all the different angles.
You are. And it's not just about joining established political structures either. Sometimes it's those big personal experiences, the ones that are tied to major political issues, that can really change the way someone thinks.
Oh yeah, those could be pivotal moments.
Absolutely. Like think about people who've been directly affected by changes in healthcare policy or immigration laws, or even the consequences of climate change. As Source 1 points out, those kinds of personal encounters can completely reshape your political views.
It becomes personal, not just theoretical.
Exactly. It can be a huge motivator to become politically active, driven by this desire for change or to protect yourself and your community.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about individual experiences now. I want to zoom out a bit. What about those massive political and cultural events that seem to shape whole generations?
Yeah.
Like, we all know where we were on 9/11. That had to have an impact, right?
Oh, absolutely. Source 3 talks about how major events like that, things like the Great Depression, the Cold War, 9/11, all of those can really leave a lasting mark on people, especially if they experience them during those key formative years.
You're kind of shaped by them.
Right. These shared experiences create this sense of collective understanding. They can influence the political attitudes of a whole generation for decades.
I remember reading in Source 4 this really striking example. It said that families who lost loved ones on 9/11 actually became more likely to identify with the Republican Party after that. It's a powerful example of how a national tragedy can lead to shifts in political beliefs.
It really is. And Source 4 also talks about this idea of period effects. These are basically broader societal trends that affect everyone, regardless of their age.
Oh, so it's not just about what generation you're in.
Right, exactly. The way public opinion on LGBTQ plus rights has evolved over the past few decades, that's a classic example of a period effect. It reshapes the whole political landscape and influences beliefs across the board, whether you were born in the 40s or the 90s.
Interesting. So it's not just our personal history, but the shared history of our society that shapes our beliefs. Okay, and I want to bring up those political labels we always use, Democrat, Republican, and so on. How much does simply identifying with a party affect our views versus our actual lived experiences?
Ah, that's a great question. And the research suggests that our political identity, like whether we consider ourselves a Democrat or a Republican, that can actually be more influential than our personal experiences. It's like we see everything through a partisan lens, you know? Sources 7 and 8 both talk about this.
So even if a new policy, let's say, has a direct impact on my life, the fact that I identify as, let's say, a Democrat could shape whether I see that impact as good or bad.
Exactly. Your pre-existing political identity basically colors how you see everything.
Wow. So it's almost like wearing those, colored glasses and everything just looks different.
That's a good analogy.
But Source 10 does point out that when something has a truly huge personal impact on you, those partisan feelings might not be as strong.
That's right. So if you experience some major injustice or you develop a deep distrust of authority, those things can be powerful enough to override your political identity, especially for younger folks. Like those intense personal experiences can sometimes make you rethink everything.
So it's not impossible to break free from those partisan tendencies if something is powerful enough.
Exactly.
And it goes even further, right? I mean, Source 11 says that our political beliefs can even affect how we understand history.
It's true. The research shows that folks who lean conservative tend to view the past more favorably, maybe because they value tradition and stability. So yeah, our current political views can actually distort how we see the past. It's fascinating.
It's almost like history is written by the victors, but in this case, the victors are our own political biases.
Ah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay, now let's talk a bit about the psychology behind all this. What role do our personalities play in shaping our political beliefs?
Well, psychology has some interesting insights here. Source 12 found that certain personality traits are often linked to specific political ideologies. For example, people who are really open to new experiences, they tend to be more liberal, while people who are very conscientious, who value order and structure, they're more likely to be conservative.
So if you're the kind of person who loves trying new things, you're curious, imaginative, you might be drawn to liberal ideas.
Exactly. And on the flip side, if you're someone who really values tradition, you like things to be predictable, well, conservative ideology might feel more comfortable.
Makes sense. But hold on. If someone's personality changes over time, does that mean their political beliefs will change too?
Well, Source 15 looked into that, and it turns out it's not so simple. Even if your personality shifts a bit, your core political beliefs tend to stay pretty stable.
So we're not constantly flip-flopping politically every time we go through a phase.
Luckily not. Our political identities can be pretty resilient.
That's good to know. Now, I remember reading about psychological defense mechanisms. Something about those being connected to conservatism specifically.
Yeah, that's in Source 17. It suggests that conservatives might be more sensitive to things that seem threatening or negative, and they often rely on defense mechanisms to cope with that. It's like they see threats to social order more easily and react more strongly to them.
Interesting. So it's not just about their values, but maybe also about how their brains are wired to process threats.
Right, exactly. And then there's this whole thing about motivated reasoning, which is basically how our existing beliefs can influence how we see new information. Source 18 digs into this.
Oh, yeah, I remember this. It was like, we see what we want to see.
Exactly. And it all ties into cognitive biases, like confirmation bias, which is this tendency to seek out information that supports what we already believe and to ignore or downplay anything that challenges our views.
So if I'm convinced that, let's say, stricter gun control is the answer, I'm going to be more likely to remember stories about gun violence and ignore statistics that might suggest otherwise.
Pretty much, yeah. And Source 18 points out that emotions play a big role here, too. Like empathy, especially when it's triggered by personal hardship or seeing other people struggle, can actually make us more open to different viewpoints.
That's good to hear. So maybe if we can tap into our empathy, we can bridge some of those political divides.
It's definitely possible. But on the flip side, as Source 20 notes, negative emotions can actually fuel political action, even if those emotions aren't so good for us in the long run. Like if you feel personally wronged by a political decision, you might be more likely to get involved, even if it stresses you out.
So it's like our anger can drive us to action. Interesting how that works.
Right. Sometimes even negative emotions can have a powerful impact on our political behavior.
Okay, we've talked about individual psychology, but what about the bigger picture, those broader social forces that might be at play?
Well, political sociology is all about that, looking at how society and government interact and influence each other. And one key concept is that ideology, the way we see the world politically, it's not just a personal thing, it's also a social thing. It helps us make sense of the world, and it influences the communities we belong to. Source 23 talks about this.
So our ideology helps us figure out where we fit in.
Exactly.
And Source 24 brings up a really important point about societies that have a lot of inequality. They say that the dominant ideology, the set of beliefs that are most common, often reflects the interests of those who are already in power.
So the people at the top get to shape the narrative.
In a way, yeah. And it's interesting to think about that in terms of education. We talked about how higher education is often linked to more liberal views. Well, Source 25 backs that up, and it's something that sociologists have observed for a long time. But again, it's not clear if it's the education itself that causes this shift, or if it's just that people who are already inclined toward liberal views are more likely to seek out higher education. That chicken and egg problem again.
Right. But either way, it's an interesting connection. And Source 26 suggests that political ideology is kind of like people developing their own theories about where they fit in society and what their options are.
So it's like we're all trying to figure out how to navigate the political landscape based on where we stand.
Exactly. It's like we're all political strategists in our own way.
I like that. Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here. Individual journeys, psychology, sociology, major events, political identities. How do we even weigh all these different factors? What's the most important?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, the research suggests that there's no easy answer. It's not like one thing outweighs all the others. It's more like they're all tangled up together.
A big messy knot.
Right. Our summary of tables 1 and 2 from the research really highlights this. It shows that while our personal journeys are definitely important, they're always interacting with all these other factors. Our political identity, our upbringing, our education, our social environment, even the media we consume.
So it's like this big complex web of influences. And I know we keep coming back to this, but it seems like our political identity, that sense of belonging to a party, can sometimes be the strongest factor of all, even more than our actual experiences. Source 8 was really clear about that.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. Our partisanship can really shape how we see everything. But it's not all doom and gloom. Source 35 found that sharing personal experiences, especially stories about hardship or injustice, can actually help people from different political backgrounds connect with each other. It can make them more empathetic and less likely to see the other side as irrational.
So stories have the power to bridge those divides.
They really do. Personal narratives can be super powerful tools for building understanding.
Okay, that gives me some hope. But then there's that flip side, right? Source 8 also warns that this tendency to interpret everything through our partisan lens can actually make political polarization even worse.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. If we only focus on the experiences that fit our existing beliefs and we dismiss anything that doesn't, it just pushes us further apart.
We end up in our own echo chambers.
Exactly. And Source 33 makes a good point about this focus on personal narratives and politics. They say it can be really empowering for marginalized communities to share their stories and make their voices heard, but we have to be careful that it doesn't overshadow the need to understand the bigger systemic issues at play.
So individual stories matter, but we need to see the forest for the trees.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that our personal journeys can lead us down different paths politically. Like, sources 1 and 10 both found that experiencing injustice can make you more politically active, while having negative encounters with the political system can make you cynical and disillusioned. So depending on our experiences, we might end up more engaged or we might withdraw completely.
So there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right, exactly. Now, it's also important to be aware of some of the limitations when we talk about personal journeys as the main thing that shapes our political beliefs.
Yeah, because it's not always a clear cause and effect relationship.
Right, exactly. Source 25 reminds us that it can be really hard to prove a direct link between a specific experience and someone's political beliefs. Just because two things happen around the same time doesn't mean one caused the other. And as Source 18 pointed out, people sometimes remember things in a way that supports their current beliefs, even if it wasn't actually like that. Our memories aren't always reliable.
So we're all a bit biased, in a way.
We are. And, we've said this a few times now, but it bears repeating. Our political identity, that sense of belonging to a party, can be a stronger influence on our views than anything else, stronger even than our lived experiences. Source 8 really drives that point home.
It's like that party label becomes a shorthand for a whole set of beliefs.
Right, it's a powerful thing. And we can't forget about genetics either. Sources 2 and 42 suggest that our genes might actually play a role in how our political beliefs develop. Like, there might be some biological predisposition that makes some people more likely to be conservative or liberal. It's still a relatively new area of research, but it's pretty intriguing.
It's like, are we born Democrat or Republican?
Well, maybe not quite that simple, but it does suggest that nature has a role to play. And finally, Source 6 found that our core political beliefs tend to solidify as we get older, which means that our experiences in adulthood might not have as big of an impact as the experiences we had when we were younger. It's like our worldview gets kind of set in stone.
So even though our personal journey is incredibly important, and it definitely shapes how we see the world politically,
Yeah.
it's just one piece of a really complex puzzle.
Exactly. It's this interplay of our upbringing, our education, our social circles, the political climate, even maybe our genes, all working together to make us who we are politically.
Wow, that's a lot to think about. So if we were to sum all this up for our listeners, what's the main takeaway from all this research on personal journeys and political beliefs?
I think the biggest takeaway is that your personal journey matters. It really does influence your political views, but it's not the only factor. It's one piece of a much larger puzzle that includes your upbringing, your education, your social networks, the political world around you, even your biology.
And understanding those influences, both on our own beliefs and on the beliefs of others, can help us navigate all this, right?
Definitely. It can make us more aware of our own biases, help us understand why we hold certain beliefs so strongly, and maybe even make us a little more open to different perspectives.
That sounds like a good goal. So, as a final thought for our listeners today, think about a political belief that you hold really strongly, one that you're pretty passionate about. Can you trace it back to a specific experience in your life, or maybe a series of experiences? And once you've made that connection, does it give you a new perspective on that belief? Does it help you understand why someone with a different life story might see things completely differently? It's definitely worth reflecting on. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive today.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. And to all our listeners, keep those questions coming. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic.